guys. We're here today. We've got a special recording with Dr. Scott Stevenson all the way over there in Florida. Am I right by that,
Yep,
Dr. Scott? Yeah,
Tampa. Yep.
Tampa, Florida. So for those guys that are listening to this that don't particularly know or they may not have heard or seen of Dr. Scott before, he is an applied exercise physiologist who holds his PhD. He's also a licensed acupuncturist in the state of Florida and also a very accomplished and competitive bodybuilder holding 4 overall titles as well. He has such a history in the gym and also more than 2 decades worth of personal training and online coaching, and is also the training partner and advisor of IFBB Pro David Henry. He is the creator of Fortitude Training System and also the author of Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, which is a year-round reference guide, which I'm sure we're going to get into anyway, Dr. Scott. So without further ado, Dr. Scott Stevenson, everybody.
That's phenomenal. That's probably the best intro I've ever had. Thank you for that, Ben. That was great.
I haven't been practicing at all, I'm honest. Not
Yeah.
probably all this afternoon.
Yeah, it was well done. One of the things when you sent me the brief was actually to sort of answer some of those questions. But the other thing that is sort of part of my perspective is that I'm a guy who started off in the same place that everyone else does, knowing nothing and trying to figure it all out. I started in the gym when I was 11, and I made many more mistakes and did many more things, quote, wrong than I have done right over the years.
Right.
So I've just kind of kept going and kept learning, and I still keep that beginner's mindset. Like I don't know anywhere close to everything there is to know. The more I know, the more I realize I know how little I know, and I'm just like everyone else. So one of the things I try to tell people, like the Dr. Scott moniker, is just people just tend to do that. I did that with my advisor. We call him Doc. It was just sort of, it's a nickname. But even those titles can kind of create some separation with people to a certain degree. I'm just Scott. Just don't call me a 4-letter expletive and I'm fine. Just that's all good. Just think of me as a regular person who's very much like everyone. I'm just really, really curious, and it's paid off for me. So, but thank you for the accolades. Those sound all great, and immediately those can create fear, and I can see it sometimes in people's eyes, and that's the last thing I want, because that gets in the way of educating and helping. So
exactly. But I think with everything that you've done as well, Scott, and what you provide for the industry, it's worth just kind of getting guys to understand and know that, look, when this guy opens his mouth, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt and listen to him as well. So I think that when we go through that tiered approach in terms of guys separating the dogma from what guys have got and able to share with their experiences, I think you're one of those guys definitely that I would want my students to listen to anyway. So that's the whole reason we're looking to set this up. So you've kind of already touched on it a little bit there, Scott, but can you just kind of go about like how you got into the industry then?
Oh geez, I wanted the weight training as long as I can remember. Literally, it was something that had been impregnated into my mind at birth, and eventually I got to the gym. I was a physics and German with a math minor. I was a double major in college, nothing related to any of this. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I really loved the exercise. I played sports in high school. So I just followed my passion. And my parents were wonderful enough to say, this is something he really wants to do. It's a sort of a fascinating story. One of my swim coaches from when I was very young in my hometown had gone on to get his PhD at Ball State. Dave Kostel is a really well-known, I think he's retired now. He's a professor emeritus, I believe, there. Exercise physiologist. He and Jack Wilmore wrote a multitude of textbooks early on for like 20 years. They wrote the undergraduate exercise textbook. This PhD swim coach of mine was at the Olympic Training Center. I came to know about this through my mom. She talked to his mother at some sort of a social engagement, and I found out that you can actually go and study exercise in a formal way. So I just wanted to become the world's greatest personal trainer. That's really what started it. So I went out to Colorado Springs, and then the path was very, very winding. But and I found out that there are other graduate programs. I ended up going to the University of Texas at Austin, which is very highly regarded as a research institution. Jack Wilmore was there. People might know John Ivey. He's written a nutrient timing book that people refer to sometimes. He's sort of at one end of the nutrient timing spectrum. Ed Coyle has done a lot of stuff with Gatorade. He's got a plethora of really good research on exercise performance, endurance, and And I worked with a guy, Roger Fair. He was my mentor there. We did some work with animals, and then eventually I got to work. I convinced him to let me work with people, and then took off from there. But yeah, I just basically done what I loved and been somewhat cautious not to end up, in living next to a trash dumpster along the way. Obviously, we have to keep things, make ends meet.
Yeah.
But I've just sort of had the ability to be able to find something that I love, that I'm passionate about, that hasn't faded yet. So I'm really blessed.
No, perfect. Perfect. And for guys that are new to you as well, Dr. Scott, I want them to understand that you've got it on your t-shirt and well, your vest, should I say,
Yes.
Fortitude Training. Now the Fortitude Training system, I've got the ebook. I've followed the plan before myself, and the results that I got on that personally, off of one kind of blast on that one, what phenomenal, really. It kind of changed my mindset in terms of, it doesn't have to be exercise structured in this certain way. It can open your mind up more.
Right.
So could you just kind of introduce what Fortitude Training is to guys and how that idea came along?
Yeah, it's kind of the culmination of things that I learned in the gym. Literally, I've been training about 30 years. Sometimes I get asked, so how long you been doing this? And this
Yeah,
usually be a young guy, and I say, how old are you? And they'll say, oh, I'm 23. I'm like, well, 7 years before you were born is when I
yeah,
started. Like, okay, it basically sits in you didn't do this in 2 years.
yeah,
So the things I learned over the course of time, making lots of mistakes, trying high volume regimes, the quote
mhm,
unquote bro split once a week,
yeah,
those things just weren't suited very well for me. Ended up sort of finding my way into doing a relatively high frequency type of abbreviated routine that was almost identical to DC training or dog crap training. And then I
mhm,
stumbled across Dante, who
yeah,
is now a friend, and started doing that. I was actually his official trainer for a good bit. He would just send me clients,
yeah,
people that wanted to do DC training. And
awesome,
along the ways, I had to manipulate some of those things. And I always kept on learning, changing things, doing what was no longer really DC training.
hmm,
And I had a about after a competition where I tried something called Titan training,
right,
which this is all outlined in the book. It's a
yeah,
very
yeah,
high frequency training. And I tried to follow it as best I could. And I literally actually did overtrain myself
right,
to
yeah,
where I had to I've taken 2 months. I took 2 months off because I had no choice in the matter.
two
I
months,
was just,
that's a lot.
yeah, it was
Wow,
really, I really truly had overtrained. I really haven't taken any longer than maybe a month or two off.
hmm,
Actually, a month when I was traveling, backpacking Europe.
yeah,
And other than that, it's just been, a week here and there. I
hmm,
blew myself, but I learned a lot in doing that. I realized I actually started making really good progress with this high frequency regime, but I
hmm,
realized it was too much. And I realized by stepping past the line in terms of how much I can recover from, where that line is, and some things that I can do to prevent that from happening.
hmm,
So, one of the things that I was doing in following that program to the best I possibly could, there were some details there that I just had to kind of guess at,
yeah,
was I was
yeah,
taking multiple sets to failure after failure, just training as hard
mm,
as pretty much I ever have,
yeah,
and as hard as pretty much you'll ever see anybody train. It was just really kind of ridiculous.
uh-huh,
But those failure points, one of the things I sort of gleaned from that, and I hear this repeatedly, is those failure points where you literally go to what we now call 0 reps in reserve. You literally take a set to momentary muscular failure.
hmm,
Those seem to create an inroad into the nervous system, which then, of course, is intimately connected with the endocrine system, the immune system, all
hmm,
those things that seem to sort of crumble when an overtraining phenomenon happens.
yeah,
Those get really insulted by those sets where you're just driving and driving and driving, and you come to a complete standstill with a heavy load, and you have to put it down.
hmm,
So I did that to the nth degree when I was training this way, and it was working quite well. I'd come up after a show. I was eating a lot of food. I was recovering. I was in a situation where I could rest a lot. Obviously, there's at some point in time you can't recover
yeah,
completely from a just an obscene training load.
yeah,
But I recognize some value in doing that, and everything I've done before then, I'm like, okay, I can piece this together. I
uh-huh,
can make something of value here, and that came to be what I sort of concocted as Fortitude Training. I
hmm,
had like 10 or 12 people that I sort of did a beta run with, friends of mine. Dave Henry was one of these people.
Right.
some
Yeah.
friends back in Arizona where I lived at the time, and they were the beta testers, so they ran through the program
Hmm.
in its original format and gave me feedback on everything from, and I'm doing this muscle rounds. I have a hard time counting, like I get
Yeah.
confused, or like, how do I do this? Can you simplify this? To, this volume may be too much for me. So I ended up with the system that I have with
Hmm.
by combining 30 years of training, my own personal experiences, especially in that sort of that unique period where I overtrained myself,
Hmm.
and then from the information I got from those folks, as well as people that have been doing it since then.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah,
think it's an awesome training system in terms of you've cracked on there regarding your recovery and your rest. Now, with Fortitude, when I'm only training 4 times a week when I'm doing it, it balances out the rest and recovery aspect of it and your different tiered approaches and things like that.
right.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of like train optimally to the point that you can recover to with that training system. And if obviously the person can auto regulate what tier that they need to be on as well.
It's really kind of a fascinating thing. I think what has happened. This is just like one insight into linear periodization models and the idea of periodizing or structuring programs.
Hmm.
Is a lot of that information and those perspectives and those strategies come from situations where, especially if you look back at the periodization literature, which is rooted in strength and power sports, where you've
Hmm.
got one coach working with a very small handful of athletes in a very intimate situation, and they can see that the person comes in the gym and they're dragging their bag,
Hmm.
and their eyes are at half mast. They know they need to pull things back. They can watch bar velocity. These are coaches who have decades and decades of experience, and they know that athlete in and out because they see them
Hmm.
every single day. And of
Yeah.
course, they're doing everything to help with their recovery too. So it's a very different situation. So you can create programs like that, which are periodized in a certain manner, and there's a structure that comes from that. But those things would be adjusted on the fly by those coaches.
Hmm.
And when you then try to take a sort of a black and white periodization approach, do these many sets for these many reps, increment this over the course of time, and just do it no matter what. You just
Yeah.
connect the dots. Even if your sleep is starting to suffer, if you're measuring heart rate variability, that's starting to suffer. Everything
Hmm.
is telling you you're doing too much. Muscle soreness, all the clues are there. That's just a really silly way to train. That just doesn't make
Hmm.
any sense.
Yeah.
And some data now are starting to come available that tells us that auto regulation makes sense. That
Hmm.
if you go into the gym and
Yeah.
you don't feel like you're going to be on for that day, it makes sense to pull back.
Yeah.
And so that was just an obvious thing that I've been doing for years. Bodybuilders have been doing that for years.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's the stories of like Arnold and Franco. They walk in the gym and like, some days it just wouldn't have it. They just say screw it and they go grab a coffee and they go down to the beach for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that apparently happened, and that's a
Right.
smart way to do things. There are certain days when you're probably asking for injury more so than you really want to risk,
Hmm.
and you just need a day off. So Dante Trudell had done that with DC training. I've been doing that for years. John Meadows does that. He's a good friend of mine. We've talked. I helped him write one of his books, his main
Yeah.
book,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mentality of Mountain Dog Training.
Mm.
So that's so important, and that also fits in with the idea that recovery abilities are all over the place.
Hmm.
And I'd seen this actually, a related phenomenon in the research that I did when I was in grad school with regards to muscle soreness. There's a lot of muscle soreness, muscle damage studies, and there's a huge range of soreness and decrements in strength that can be evoked by the same muscle damage protocol.
Hmm.
You take people who have equivalent strength, have them do negative only knee extensions or negative only exercise, eccentric only, and you produce an insult, inflammatory response, you lose strength, you have pain, late
Yeah.
onset muscle soreness. Some people, it's hardly even noticeable, and others are crippled.
Hmm.
And there's actually some genetics related to that I'm kind of digging into
Right.
that as sort of a side topic. Yeah, there are certain
Yeah.
probably some single nucleotide polymorphisms related to some of the inflammatory things like IL-6 and some
Right.
other chemical mediators that are involved with actually everything from inflammatory response Some of them are the costameric proteins, the proteins in the skeletal muscle that actually give it structure, which, if depending on the variations there in the genes, this is what's been speculated at least,
Yeah.
it would make it more easily disrupted during a high tension eccentric contraction. So literally, it's like the material of the muscle in terms of the structural proteins differs depending on which gene you have.
Really?
And if you have the material that's more likely to be disrupted during a damaging exercise bout, well, that's going to then lead to more inflammation, et cetera, et cetera. So along the sequelae of events that are involved with the initial insult and the secondary inflammatory response, there's genetics there, which play a role. So I'm someone, this is why it's interesting, I'm always sore. Like I've been sore for over 30 years, nearly 40 years for the most part.
It's a bad day if you're
Yeah.
not sore. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to use that necessarily as a marker, but you're not shooting for that, but there's something to say for that. And that's a side topic we can delve into if you like. But related to that is that some people, if they tried to train with high volume, especially if they train really, really hard, it's just obviously not going to work for them because the muscle's going to be so sore and damaged still that just that's a common sense idea that that's not going to work. Yeah. And you can see people who can get away with mass amounts of volume and those who can't. So I built the program to accommodate what was really kind of obvious. Some people recover better than others. And also because there's a certain, in the mindset of bodybuilders and athletes in general, more is better, or the more you can do, the better, is an obvious mentality that we have. It's we're bigger, faster, stronger. We're trying to become as impressive as we possibly can athletically or from a muscular development standpoint. So you want to do everything you possibly can to make that happen. And when you say to someone, no, pick a tier, figure out which volume tier gives you the best results in terms of progress, and just stick with that one tier. Just do that. Here's your instructions. Be a soldier, follow this out. And lo and behold, oh my gosh, you did the tier that you didn't think would work so well, and you made tremendous gains. Yeah. That gives a black and white answer to something that's very difficult for athletes to auto-regulate in many cases. It's like, you're telling me not to do more when I really want to. I know I can get conditioned enough to survive these workouts, but surviving the workout is not the same as progressing your muscular development and growing more muscle mass. And that's a hard thing to differentiate. You could tell me like you're gonna have to train 8 hours a day for the rest of your life, and otherwise, we're gonna exterminate your family and everyone you know and love. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. But that obviously I could survive that, but that would not be the best thing for creating muscle mass.
Yeah, wouldn't be optimal.
So it's not at all optimal. No. Yeah. So I put things in like the auto-regulatory aspect in there. You literally can periodize across volume tiers and the different versions. So that people can use their inner sense and be their own coach, so to speak, in a way that the research has kind of suggested in those things I talked about with where they've actually looked at auto-regulating loading and found that seems to be better for strength gains and just the variability in recovery. That's really you see it in every physiological phenomenon, really. You do, from muscle protein synthesis to damage to you name it.
Yeah, even people maybe having a hip replacement or a joint hip replacement, its recovery in certain aspects of people, it can just differ so much. So why wouldn't exercise-induced delayed onset of muscle soreness not be no different?
Absolutely. I talk. He's in the UK. I talk with some. People could probably figure this out this weekend. Who is the training partner of a very high-level pro, and he doesn't have near the physique of his training partner. He's got a great physique, but he's not. He's not going to be on the Olympia stage, and he can recover from the training like a monster. He's built for recovery. He's a workhorse in the gym.
Right.
You can destroy him, but he can't create the muscle mass that his training partner can. And his training partner, in terms of maintaining muscle mass and not like sort of sliding into a state looking stringy relative to his physique, he has to be actually has sort of a delicate muscular system. It's ridiculously huge, but if he pushes too hard or does too much, he will backslide really, really easily.
Yeah.
So like it's an interesting contrast. One person not nearly as muscular, you can hit him with anything. Roll him over with um, a freight train, and he's going to get right back up and keep coming. He's like the juggernaut in the
Yeah.
gym, but he
Yeah.
doesn't look that way. The other guy looks like the juggernaut, but you add him 2 more sets on a muscle group for 2 more weeks, and he'll backslide on everything.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so those subtle things you can figure out for yourself, and
Uh-huh.
I built that into the program as a way for people to sort of tease those things out on their own as much as
Hmm.
they can and
That's
optimize.
what I love about it, because it's like you haven't kind of said, here's a black and white thing, go
Mm,
away and do that. It's like, right, no, you spent years in the trenches, so you've worked things out yourself, and now you're just putting more an advisory role into these are maybe the trenches that you want to be digging in, rather than just blindly going away and doing it. Because like you said, that law
yeah.
of individuality for everybody is going to be so different on a different spectrum for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also noticed something in Fortitude Training as well on the ebook, Scott, that you've got almost like the food plan in there. So you also talk
Mm,
about food. And one thing that I kind of want to talk about in regards to that is the peri-workout nutrition
right.
side of things, because that's particularly something when we're dealing with people coming into industry, that'll be so different to them. If they've just come in from a desk job, qualifying as a personal trainer, they've probably never even heard of the term peri-workout nutrition before.
Right.
So I'm just to kind of introduce them to what that is. Have you got a kind of like a role as to why it's in there in the Fortitude Training book?
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of. Very basically, you can think of the term that I use. You see this. You see various terms used to kind of describe the same approach.
Hmm.
Nutrient timing in general, or
Yeah.
just a quote unquote intra-workout. So you're drinking something that has macronutrients, carbs and protein, or carbs and amino acids during
Yeah.
the workout. And I kind of lumped it all into peri-workout recovery supplementation. So
Hmm.
recovery supplementation around the workout.
Hmm.
And the idea is that in a global sense, you're creating a stimulus that from which you want to recover, and the recovery would be more muscle mass when we're thinking about it from a physique
Yeah.
standpoint,
Hmm.
which is what a lot of people really, some people have functional outcomes, but most people in the gym, seeing personal trainers,
Yeah.
it's bodybuilding. It's a
It is.
vanity thing. You want to look better when you
Yeah.
go out, and it's a physique enhancement type of thing.
Yeah.
So you're trying to enhance your recovery as much as you possibly can.
Hmm.
And the way you can sort of, I think, sort of conceptualize this in a way that people will get it is, imagine if you just you trained at night, and you ate all of your meals, all of your food in some bizarre intermittent fasting type phenomenon, 12 hours opposite of your training session. So
Right.
you
Yeah.
trained at 6 p.m. and you ate nothing all night long, and you ate all your food at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So you'd be really, really hungry probably by the time you trained.
You won't be able to sleep. Well, I wouldn't
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It would be. It would just, there's all sorts of awful things that would come about from that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you've created when you go and you train, and now you've created some muscle damage. You've turned on muscle protein synthesis. You basically initiated, and this is the whole point of the workout in a certain way,
Hmm.
all these processes in the muscle that would allow it to grow, and you want to then provide it with what it needs to make that happen.
Hmm.
And some of those are nutrients. You need to have actually, obviously, calories.
Hmm.
It's an energetically expensive phenomenon to grow muscle mass.
It
You need
is.
to have protein.
Hmm.
Muscles roughly one quarter, 20 some percentage protein. Um, and doing so also creates a hormonal environment with elevating insulin levels, especially
Hmm.
to control the balance of protein. So you favor protein accrual, a positive protein balance, inhibit the
Yeah.
breakdown. And it's a bit iffy if you're digging the literature, but maybe you can increase protein synthesis as long as you provided amino acids as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So you really want to be in a fed state.
Hmm.
And another way you can even look at this is almost sort of kind of an armchair exercise, armchair evolutionary biologist perspective
Right.
is, if you're a hunter gatherer, and you've just gone through some massive push to hunt down your prey or to get your food, and there's no food available. it doesn't make sense to turn on all those mechanisms of recovery and adding muscle mass, which is an expensive process, if there's not going to be any food available or other ways for the body to adapt. On the other hand, if you just had that big stimulus and you provide plenty of food, that's basically sending a very generic signal that there's energetic abundance, there's plenty of food, there's plenty of building materials, everything's there that we would need for allowing all the adaptations to occur that we want. So that's the idea. One of the things, you don't have to have an intra-workout drink necessarily. The main idea is that you have some nutrients available. So some people might do better with a medium-sized meal that doesn't cause any gastric distress, like an hour before. We've got some carbohydrates that will last them probably for a typical 1 hour workout, and then they can eat something thereafter. But eventually, you can imagine if you start spacing things out, and if your last meal was 3 hours before, and your post-workout meal is 3 hours after, that you're going to probably run into issues there.
Yeah, it's quite a time.
Yeah, and that's when the research looking at like the anabolic window is something that is like if you look at the meta-analyses and the reviews that are done. Alan Aragon, who is part of that Swoley Trinity that we've mentioned before, a great guy. He and Brad Schoenfeld have done a meta-analysis and review along with Krieger looking at this, and they were just looking at protein but you have to take the studies where they're doing before and after, within an hour before and hour after, I think. Right. And they suggest there's no real timing effect there. In, I think, 19 of the 23 studies were with untrained individuals. Right. So some of those studies are not, well, first, untrained individuals are going to grow pretty well from pretty much anything. Yeah, new beginners. And those studies aren't necessarily all, and those sorts of reviews and meta-analyses aren't necessarily looking at what happens. They don't outlaw the idea that nutrient timing is at all valuable to some degree. Even Brad will say that. It's like, it makes sense. Like, it doesn't mean you can just eat all your food 12 hours away from your workout. You know this. So if you're someone who wants to then optimize things, optimization is what we want. Basically add up all those little bits and pieces till you get the most optimal scenario that you possibly can create. And there are several good studies that show that this can happen. Having some carbohydrates and protein before and or immediately after, or even during your workout, definitely in the short term improves your protein balance, and in the long term can actually help with muscle mass and strength gain. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, because you'll see, and I think you maybe want to talk about this. You'll see one study that says one thing, and another study that says another thing, and this actually reflects what people know, is that some people individuals will get their best results from squatting, and some people get their best results from leg pressing. Yeah. Some people should do a higher volume because it suits their personality or maybe their fiber type or what have you, and some people would do better with lower volume. So it's not so surprising that different studies would give you different results, especially when, and this is the most important thing, it's probably one of the things that Western science lacks in the most, is we do a horrible job of trying to replicate findings. Right. Yeah. You go and you take the same study parameters, the same study design, and try to see if what happened previously happens again. Maybe change one thing, add an extra group. So you're testing what was previously found to not have an effect or to have an effect again. And many studies don't get published. If there's no effect, they just don't publish them. Really? Yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately. I've seen that happen. And like that, of course, completely skews the body of literature, because you basically are biasing the sampling that you're getting of the studies. If the studies that show some tremendous effect are the ones that get published, and the ones that don't show an effect don't, well, then maybe, who knows? I don't know the numbers. This is sort of a thing you'd have to just you're looking around in the dark. Yeah. Who knows how many studies aren't getting published because they don't show findings. Yeah, yeah. They're wanting that headline almost. Yeah. Yeah.
We might as well get onto it now then, Scott, with us running through it, because we'll get onto your book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. And like I've already aforementioned, it's a full annual program of whatever you want to do to be your own bodybuilding coach. That's what it says on the cover of the book.
Hmm.
But in there, I thought there were a really good section that probably before I bought the book, I didn't realize would be in there, which it kind of brought a smile to my face when I saw it there, which was critical thinking. So like be a critical thinking bodybuilder or be your own critical thinking coach.
Right.
And it's just kind of looking at the different types of like authorities of where you may hear and pick information from and so on and so forth. So can I maybe get your thoughts in regards to why you've put that in there, and then we'll roll on from there with that.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach is that, well, ultimately you make all the decisions. Even
Hmm.
if you're someone who has a coach and that coach says, I want you to eat 8 string beans and use a half a tab of butter and 3 ounces of milk or whatever,
Yeah.
you can make the call unless your coach has locked you into prison and they're force feeding you.
Yeah.
You make those decisions
Yeah.
at all times to do those things. It's ultimately up to you. And being cognizant of why it is that we make those decisions and what is steering our decision making
Hmm.
process is absolutely utterly vital for coaching yourself, as well as I think sort of navigating through life and kind of realizing that you're the ultimate purveyor of your future.
You are.
You're the
Yeah.
one who makes the. I mean, there's a subtle sort of connection between be your own bodybuilding coach and be your own Buddha. And
Right.
Siddhartha Gautama was based. That was kind of one of his bottom line thoughts is that if you see if you probably heard me say this. I know you listen to my podcast, but
Yeah.
if you meet a Buddha in the road, shoot him. It's one of my favorite Zen koans. And if you meet someone who says, "I'm your Buddha, I'm your guru, I'm the one to tell you what and how to do things at all times," that's the last person you want to listen to because ultimately you can do all those things.
Hmm.
So we're surrounded by sources of information, or you almost said it. I thought you're thinking about what I call ways of knowing,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Ways of knowing. Yeah.
ways of knowing. Yeah, so we can come to know things. Also, you can hear something on an advertisement that just seems like wow, that's just phenomenal, and you think that's the best car because the people at Nissan put an advertisement together with some really cool backdrops. You like the dog that was in the truck, and the woman was beautiful, and that's just the
Yeah.
truck that I want.
Yeah.
And stepping back and saying, you know what, I haven't done any research whatsoever on that truck. I
Yeah.
just got like bamboozled by a really, really slick advertisement. Maybe I should stop and think about this. There might be a better truck for me if I actually
Yeah.
step back. Um, when it comes to coaching and choosing yourself as the coach or someone else, you're ultimately relying upon an authority in a coach if you hire that person,
Hmm.
and that's totally fine. We have to rely upon it. Speaking of trucks, I just talked to my mechanic down the street. He's worked on all my vehicles. He's a great guy. I know he's honest. I've had hour-long conversations. I've literally spent the night in his shop
Yeah.
when one of my RVs broke down. We like hung out and fixed stuff together. He's a great guy. I
Yeah.
consider him a friend. So I trust in his authority. I know he's being honest. He may not be perfect, but I know he's not trying to bamboozle me.
Hmm.
But we have to realize that we have, and I mentioned this at the beginning, um, sort of built into the human psyche to a certain degree. Everyone's a little different in this. It makes sense that we would listen to leaders and trust in authority. It
Hmm.
helps keep us together as members of a tribe. If everyone were a
Yeah.
complete individualist, we would have never survived. We would, people would just be like leaving their babies and going off on their own adventures. Like there would be
Yeah.
there was no families, no tribes, no collectivism among humans.
Hmm.
So we naturally do that. And when you see someone who has a cult of personality, who has degrees after his name, or
Hmm.
especially and I talk about this in the book, especially in the bodybuilding world, has a phenomenal physique,
Hmm.
we attribute to that person knowledge level, and often it's just natural to hand over some of the reins as to what you should or shouldn't do
Hmm.
because that person looks better than I do, or that person has a degree that I can't imagine getting, or that person speaks really, really eloquently and they use words that I don't understand.
Hmm.
So he or she must know more than I do. And so that whole chapter is really about just getting people to step back and realize that having a little perspective, seeing the forest from the trees, is absolutely vital to being critically minded about what you're doing and not doing. And it's even like at the level of just having a coach. If you ever have a coach, just a word of thought. Don't take it from me, but see if this makes sense to you. If you have a coach whom you to whom you pose a question, he says, just don't ask me questions, just do what I say. That happens a lot.
It's not so
That's
much
not
a coach, that's more of a dictator
That's a
that you've got
dictator. It's
there.
not an educator.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to think to yourself, well, why is that they would be doing that?
Hmm.
What's the reason behind that? And that does happen. I've known many coaches who. Some people actually want that. That's a whole other level of kind of an issue where someone really wants. They've actually been taken advantage of
Yeah.
because it's such an interesting thing. Here's another important point. I could ramble on about this for days. Literally, I've had so many conversations. But one of the things that's really important to realize is that this is not buying a truck
Hmm.
or, picking out, what kind of lettuce you're going to get at the grocery store, what have you. This is what we as humans with egos, to a large degree, equate with who we are. Our
Hmm.
bodies,
Hmm.
especially in Western society, are so important to us.
Hmm.
It's like it's the shell. It's like we think of it as us to a large degree.
Yeah, yeah.
Many of us do, especially those who are in this industry who are seeking this out. So you're immediately vulnerable to being taken advantage of when someone tells you, I can make you better. I can make you leaner and more
Hmm.
muscular and more attractive to the opposite sex. And I can get you more likes on Instagram
Yeah.
and all those things that come along with that. And it's like the amount of leverage that advertisers and companies have to get you to do things you wouldn't otherwise do is
Hmm.
tremendous.
Hmm.
Um, and if you realize that's like, okay, so they've got me, they've got me by as one of my, they got me by the short and curly. It's one of my t-shirts. So they really got me there because I can't even be consciously aware of how much I want this, and how much I'm willing to sort of subjugate my own thought processes to
Hmm.
external influence unless I realize that, yeah, this is really important to me
Hmm.
and step back from that and say, okay, I know he looks awesome. I know he's been doing this for a while, but that does not make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to just have to question that.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing can be like literally leaving that opportunity, that like sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, like this, like, gosh, if I just listened to everything he said, I would look just like he does or his clients do or what have you.
Yeah.
And that leads us into the idea of genetics. And there's I have a
Hmm.
whole spiel on that.
Yeah.
And so the reason that I put the book together and the reason I have that chapter about being the critically minded bodybuilder is so that people then have kind of an alternative.
Hmm.
I called it a roadmap. So
Yeah.
you basically, here's the things that I figured out work. Here are options for you to try. Like literally, and I've had people who had people now that the book's been out for a while who've taken the book and they've used it through like a full post-contest, off-season, pre-contest coming around and they've done their shows.
Yeah.
It's so awesome to hear people
I bet that's
coming
thrilled.
back to me. Yeah, they bought the book and sometimes they bought the hardcover. I have no way of really tracking that because it goes through Amazon or Barnes and
Right.
Noble. The
Yeah.
ebooks I can see, but they bought a hardcover. So I just get an Instagram story, what have you, and says, this is the book that I did, and I did this, this, and this. And they did it all on their own.
That's
Cost
crazy.
them it's the cost of like less than 2 personal training sessions in the gym with
Exactly.
some guy who might have been eating his chicken and rice and counting your reps for you and not
Yeah.
providing any information.
Yeah.
So and I think in doing that, in being able to sort of step back, um, I don't want to run past our time here because I know we were trying to go with a half an
Oh,
hour, but
yeah, yeah. No, it's no problems.
okay,
Depending
good.
on how much time you've got, Dr. Scott. I mean,
Oh yeah,
we'll look to cover this, and
yeah,
yeah.
I'll ramble. But it's uh it I think it allows people who, not everyone's suited for that. Some people just, they want to have a little bit of hand holding. Their
Mm.
insecurities maybe too large. They just like, I mean, some people don't want to have to go and do the research to figure out which truck to buy. They just want to go and like get the best truck and be done with it. Just tell
Yeah.
me what to do so I can go get my, tell me what to eat, et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for other people, there's intrinsic, beautiful value
There is.
in digging in and figuring stuff out. I think probably the most people that are listening to this
Hmm.
who are going to go to your academy and study,
Yeah.
the knowledge is in and of itself valuable, and
Yeah.
figuring those things out about themselves is valuable. And so that's kind of my main message is like you can do this on your own
Hmm.
and reap those rewards, and also maybe even pick up on some skills that apply outside of the world of bodybuilding.
Hmm.
So,
Like that one
you're
that we
used,
just talked about, like in terms of critical thinking, that and ways of knowing that can be so applicable to other things. So, like you said,
yeah,
marketing, buying a nice car, or going shopping and finding food supplements or something. It can be so applicable to every different things.
yeah, yeah. I was having a conversation with a friend just last night, and he's really he's been troubled by the news, because the
Hmm.
news is it's about, to a certain degree, they like to sell outrage that
Hmm.
immediately captures people,
Yeah.
and it makes sense. Like, when you hear about some horrible thing that happened, it would make sense biologically that we'd be sort of upset by that, because normally
Of
hearing
course.
those things in eons past would mean that someone who's probably directly related to us had been harmed. It
Hmm.
makes sense that we want to stand up to protect those people.
Yeah.
But when they say that on the news and it's someone across the world that you can't do anything about, not that you don't care for those people and you wish that upon them, but there's nothing you can do and
Hmm.
nothing you plan to do, to get outraged and all upset
Hmm.
is just sort of silly.
Hmm.
So I stepped back and said, hey, like, think about what's the purpose of the news? To get viewers. Their mission isn't necessarily,
No.
at least the ones you're listening to, a lot of the mainstream, to provide you with the most accurate information. They would have to sell advertisements and that kind of stuff. So think about the source. Be a critical thinking consumer of the information. And I have a YouTube video. I called it Clean Thinking.
Right. Yeah.
And
I
it's
don't.
kind of the idea of clean eating.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen
Yeah.
that one.
And
I'll have to have a look at that. Is that on your YouTube channel?
yeah, it's on my YouTube channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I'll
just
have a
sat out
look.
on my next to my pool the other day, or a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
just thought about it. It's like we're thinking about, like, what we put in our body.
Hmm.
Everyone has their own definition of clean eating. For someone who follows keto, it might be no carbs. For
Yeah.
someone else, it might be chicken and rice, what have you. But we always have a choice as to what we feed into our brain that then creates the thoughts that we have.
Hmm.
And you can not watch TV. It's an option. There's no requirement
Yeah. You don't
to
have to
watch the
do it.
news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you pick and choose your sources. So you can eat organic, or you can just eat conventional, and you can watch certain news sources and not others,
Hmm.
and you can take that as far as you like. So that clean thinking idea is something that coaches and personal trainers, obviously the folks that are listening to this,
Hmm.
can definitely apply. Criticize everyone. Criticize me. The reason I have like way too many references in the Be Your Own
Oh,
Bodybuilding Coach. Like, it's
I've
like,
got it written down here. It's 2,465 references you've got in that
yeah,
book. It's like, I remember
yeah.
looking, it's almost like a quarter of the book at the back of reference citations. I'm like,
It
gosh.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a hard time formatting. There's actually some grammatical errors, because the thing was so huge. It moved pictures around and created all sorts of issues. So
Yeah.
there's some errors in there that are just simply, I can blame it on the references because it was so huge, but
Hmm.
those are there, especially in the ebook, so that when I say something about essential fatty acids
Hmm.
and I have 5 references, you can hyperlink to the bibliography and then find those. Simply copy the full reference and paste in as Google Scholar, or
Yeah.
link a link, or click on a link that I have there and read that information for yourself. Like, that doesn't sound right what Scott said. That just doesn't make. I don't know about that. Like, if I say this is a controversial thing, like, I want to find what the controversy is.
Mm.
Click, click. Next thing you know, you're literally reading that information from which I have, and it's filtered through me,
Hmm.
the quote unquote authority here. I
Yeah.
have derived that idea that there's controversy. maybe there's none in your mind. Maybe you think, oh, that's hogwash. Or maybe since the book came out, there's a new paper that's clarified that.
Yeah.
So don't just trust me. Like I love it when people criticize and come at me, as long as they're nice,
Yeah, yeah,
because that tells you they're thinking. That's awesome. That's what I want.
yeah. But even in that, I know you said this book's about be your own bodybuilding coach, but now you're asking, like, you've got people the opportunity to be their own kind of reference guide. Go away. These are the references. Go away, have a look, make your own mind up. I mean, you can plug whatever
Yeah,
you want out of this data, and then maybe go away and apply it and come up with your own thesis on what you've just read. It's
right.
that's what you want in people to do, though, be applicable to that information that you're giving them.
Yeah. I tell you, I mean, for here's anyone who's done a graduate degree, like a master's degree, we have to write a thesis or dissertation or whatever they may call it, depending on the program.
Hmm.
Um, it's almost universal now that you have to use bibliographic software
Hmm.
because otherwise you just have a mess. So if you're someone who has spent some time digging the literature, making a bibliography is very, very easy. If you have some information to substantiate whatever it is you're saying, it's really, really simple to put that into a paper or an
Yeah.
article that you've written online. It's very for anyone who really is dug into the science. So this is just another sort of little piece of insight is that if you read an article, this is my opinion at least,
Hmm.
if you read an article that says the science says this, and we know from the science, and they keep on referencing the science, but they're referring to the science, but not
Hmm.
referencing any actual scientific literature. That's a big red flag in my mind. And actually, I
Yeah.
go into some examples in the book. I
Yeah.
call some people out
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because it's not a difficult thing to do.
No,
Really, if
especially
you've
now.
actually,
Especially
yeah,
now where you can just copy and paste it and find out who the author is in the journal. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
Smith et al. 2007. You can do it that way. That's very, very simple. You have to don't have
Yeah.
to use numbers.
Hmm.
So if someone's not willing to do that, that immediately tells me, I mean, unless it's like, even then, like I would still reference this, I even talked about causation, like smoking causes cancer.
Hmm.
Research proves that smoking causes cancer. It's like, no, Western research doesn't prove anything. Proofs are functional mathematics. And there are smokers who don't get cancer, and there are people who have never smoked who get lung cancer as well.
Mm.
So it's not an absolute. But when even simple things like smoking causes cancer, well, that maybe you can let slide. No one's going to argue like that. There's some causation there,
Hmm.
probably. But
Hmm.
things should be referenced. They really should, so that you can follow up on that information. And if they're not referencing that, that's very, very poor form, and that is something that I would think twice about. Like, do you believe that? Go look it up, and you can. If you like rabbit holes, there's lots of nice rabbit holes you can get into, and it's not uncommon. You'll find that people are misrepresenting the science.
Right.
Um,
They could
yeah.
almost have a
So
bias and then just kind of reflect on what their personal bias might be and make it whatever
yeah.
they want it to be, manipulate the data almost.
Yeah, well, it could be a bias. It could be they're just regurgitating or parroting things. That's
Yeah.
what I tend to find is like this is the thought that, um, like there's very little literature, for instance, suggesting there's one study that really is the strongest piece of evidence suggesting that people with more type one fiber,
Yeah.
myosin type one muscle fiber would tend to have more growth from doing higher rep sets.
Right.
Now that's like that thought. Like people just say that as if like, the sun's going to come up in the morning and set at night. Like that's
Mm.
just obvious.
Hmm.
But there's very little data out there
Right. Yeah.
on that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That
it
surprised
has
me
not.
that because that's almost like gospel, what people would think
It
almost.
is. It
Yeah.
is. And to me, I mean, I thought it through before I even like dug into literature in the way I had. I always thought, well, if you're trying to create a novel stress for muscle growth, and you've got lots of type ones that are already set up to be really good at high rep sets, wouldn't you want to train them with low rep sets and give them a stimulus that
Yeah.
is they're not accommodated to, they're not accustomed to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense? I mean, either way makes sense.
Hmm.
It's just logic until you come up with some data to substantiate what the hypothesis is.
Hmm.
So
I think
as it
that's good.
turns out,
You
yes,
mentioned it, sorry, Scott, but you mentioned in the book as well, within that section, intuition and like outside of
yeah,
the box thinking. So like being able to, like you say, hear something that you will perceive as gospel, but yet almost think, wait, hold on a minute, there could be a different side to that. There could be a flip side to it. And you gave the example of Katsu, blood flow restriction. Um,
Right,
yeah, and almost like that guy going away and trialing it out and finding his own method in doing it, and that's just being
right.
intuitive, going away and thinking outside of the box.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's beautiful. I mean, and if you go to my Instagram, I come up with exercises, just on the fly. Sometimes because I can't find one that doesn't bother some niggle that I have somewhere, and I kind of have to. But there's all sorts of ways to think outside the box, and I'll be criticized, and that's like, why don't you just do the basics? I'm like, well, I do, like
yeah,
but everyone
yeah,
can see people doing deadlifts and squats and bench presses. I
yeah,
don't bench press that much really, but um, and I could also go and it's like, well, what are the basics?
hmm,
Like why do we have barbells that are straight bars like that? In what way is that anatomically suited to the human body for lifting things? It's not
hmm,
really. From as far as I can tell, we have straight barbells because those were the easiest to manufacture.
yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah,
they're they're best suited to what is the cheapest to make, industrially speaking, to put
hmm,
weights on, and that was a function of industry, hundreds of years ago, and what people could do with metals at that time.
hmm,
But that a straight barbell doesn't fit. Like it's not really in any way suited specifically for being the most basic way to add load to the human body for resistance exercise, which in and of itself is kind of
hmm,
an unnatural act, as you've probably heard me say. To
yeah,
pick
yeah,
up something and lower it repeatedly is kind of a waste of energy,
yeah, yeah,
um, unless you're trying to produce a muscular callus, so to speak, in the form of muscle growth.
hmm,
So yeah, so I'll look for things outside the box, and I'll get called on that. And some people just they want to sort of stick to those standards and not step outside the box. And now, I mean, there actually is some little discussion as to the importance of metabolic stress or what that really means in terms of muscle growth.
mm,
But the application of Katsu training and blood flow restriction um, is like no one's going to doubt that whatsoever. There's
hmm,
phenomenal physical therapy application for people who have issues with their joints where they can't really load the
yeah,
joint or the muscle, and you can apply BFR in a way to produce muscle growth and help with the rehabilitative process.
hmm,
Like that's like kind of beyond question. It's happening all over. It's been happening in the Katsu clinics for decades now in
yeah,
Japan. So that was an outside the box thinking thing. So I mean, really, it's I would imagine, if we could hop into a time travel machine and go back to when the days of Eugen Sandow and those
yeah,
folks, like it's a bizarre thing. It was outside the box thinking to lift weights. That was a
yeah,
weird
back
thing,
then.
right?
Yeah.
All that stuff was strange.
It were almost like, if you
So
look back at it, it were almost like a circus. It would come from circus origins almost, wasn't it? Strongman
it
and
was.
bodybuilding and all that type of weird thing back in the time.
It's
But now look how popular it is.
It was
Yeah,
very outside the box, very odd. Like it was a circus act. It
yeah,
was a
yeah,
freak show,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
I totally agree. So yeah, outside the box thinking and just being able to just sort of step away. One thing we haven't gotten to it, and we may not, but one of the
it's
things
okay.
that no, it's fine. Maybe we can do another one. I'd love to
Yeah,
if
no,
you're interested.
that'd be great, Scott. Yeah.
Is the idea of muscle failure and how important that is for muscle growth.
Hmm.
And when we look at that from sort of in the microscope of resistance exercise as a way to produce muscle growth, um, it's sort of like you've got your specimen of the model of muscle growth of resistance exercise under the microscope, and you're forgetting that there are all sorts of other ways that muscle can grow.
Hmm.
And there are animal models, compensatory hypertrophy, or they call it synergist ablation, where they'll cut one or more of the tendons of the plantar flexors, the calf muscles,
Hmm.
and let the other muscle grow.
Right.
And so the animals will walk around, they'll cut the soleus and the plantaris, or maybe the gastroc and the soleus, and just leave the plantaris. Various ways you can do it.
Yeah.
And in a couple of days, the animals will limp around. In a couple of days, they're walking normally. They're not doing anything where they're failing to walk or they're unable to
Yeah.
do things. They're just walking around. And you can get, much more than 50%, 100% increase in muscle mass in a matter of weeks or a month
That's crazy.
doing
Yeah.
that. Yeah, depending on how much of the muscle you cut away.
Hmm.
And there's the stretch overload with quail that people talk about.
Hmm.
Jose Antonio had as far as I know, it's still sort of the quote unquote record for the greatest extent of muscle mass increase was in the anterior latissimus dorsi, which is kind of like, it'd kind of be like if you did this in a human, you took a heavy weight, like a dumbbell, and strapped it to their arm and watched
Yeah.
to see how much the trap grew. So
Right.
they
Yeah.
strap a weight to the wings of these quail and let them drag it around or walk around with it, and the muscle that's supporting the weight can grow. And he actually did a progressive overload scenario over the course of a month where they added weight. He actually went for a couple of days, took a day off, went for a couple of days, took a day off, and progressively increased the loading. And they increased the muscle mass compared to the control animals by like over 300% by the end of like a month, 32 days. It's crazy.
That is crazy.
So that's like those two models blow away um, resistance exercise induced muscle growth
Yeah. Yeah.
by a long shot. But there's no failure there.
No, no, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you
So
think that quail, it had been throughout, it had that weight, wouldn't it? I mean, it had never just left the weight off and had a couple days rest or anything. It had the
in
weight
that model, he
throughout.
actually did that. A lot
Oh,
of
did
times
he?
they
Yeah.
just leave it on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just put a weight on, like I've seen between like 15 and 30% of the body weight, something like that. So it'd be a pretty big dumbbell. Like a 200
Yeah.
pound guy might have like a 50-pound dumbbell or something like that.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
holding all
Still.
the time. You can
Yeah.
imagine.
That's,
What's interesting is I've asked guys who like carry big military packs, and there's not like a universal consensus that you get really big traps from doing that.
mm,
Um, but you do find that obese people tend to have big calves,
from carrying
so
weight. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
carrying their
Yeah.
body weight around. But you don't see it like that's another example of obese people with really large calves. If you buy into the idea that it's the carrying that heavy body weight around repeatedly, constantly, consistently over the course of a lifetime, there's probably a developmental aspect to that. A lot of people, they start off, they were large when they were kids and they became
Mm,
large adults, so they were always carrying a heavy burden, and the calves adapted to that.
yeah.
But there's no muscle. Getting back to the point, there's no muscle failure that's
Mm,
required for that extra muscle mass. There's no muscle failure per se. Like there's no effortful pushing to the point of momentary muscular failure in
yeah.
those animal models, but the
Yeah.
growth is tremendous.
Uh-huh.
So kind of have to keep that in perspective as just sort of a way of seeing when we're thinking about volume and taking things to failure and frequency and all those resistance exercise regimes. That actually is a way that model of muscle growth is inferior to what mammalian muscle can do. It
Mm,
can grow at a much faster and to a larger extent
right.
um,
Yeah.
than what we can do with resistance exercise.
Yeah.
So there's a limiting factor there other than the
There is.
muscle,
Yeah. There is.
and it's probably the nervous system and the other associated systems. You just can't go in the gym and train, literally. Well, you could 8 hours a day, as I mentioned that other
Yeah.
facetious example, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't grow very well from that. It wouldn't happen.
No, you won't have much of a life as well, unfortunately.
No, you
As
wouldn't. No,
well.
that would be torture.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
Um,
but thinking outside the box and those sorts of things, like okay, so that's something that was gleaned from the research.
mhm.
Um, it's possible. Look at the forums of wrench monkeys, mechanics who do a
Mm,
lot of work. A lot of times they'll have really big arms on one side. Martina
mhm.
Navratilova, tennis player,
Yeah, tennis. Yeah.
her left forearm was gigantic.
Hmm.
I don't know that I don't think she did any resistance exercise for that arm. That was just from playing tennis.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can
So anyway, we
sometimes.
could go on. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. As I was going to say, you can sometimes see it. I'm over in UK, so sometimes in soccer players that you call soccer, we call football, that have a more dominant quadricep or hamstring, or like you say, even calf muscle, depending
Yeah,
on what foot that they'd kick with. So,
yeah.
uh,
Arm wrestlers.
arm wrestlers again, yeah, perfect
Yeah,
example. Yeah,
yeah.
but
I think a
again,
lot of
we
those guys do weight training too, but
yeah,
so that's not a clean example.
but
But
like
yeah, thinking outside the box and trusting your intuition. And just the thing is I think, and the last thought here is that a lot of times bodybuilders can be so sort of OCD about wanting to like make sure they're getting optimal progress and everything's sort of in the right that they don't want to like do an experiment and say, what would happen if I just like, you know, if I just tried like putting in a day of fasting once
Hmm.
a week. I hear people doing this like, no, I'm going to lose muscle. So they don't want
Yeah.
to do that. It may work wonderfully for them, for their GI system, whatever. There may be benefits, but they don't want to spend 2 months doing that. And so you have to be a little bit willing to be a little bit of a renegade to
Hmm.
follow your intuition, because you're stepping outside of the known.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for some people to do,
Yeah.
but it can be a lot of fun too, to go on a little adventure with your body. So
That's it. That's why
yeah,
we're in this industry, because we love to just try different things out and work our own way in doing it
yeah,
and find out our
yeah.
own. Again, I think that's perfect there, Scott. I think we've covered a good amount of different stuff on there. So, if any of the guys that are listening to this, if they want to get in contact with yourself, or if they want to have a look at purchasing your Fortitude Training ebook, or maybe even the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, have you got some references to where they can go and do that?
I've got a whole bunch of URLs, but the
Yeah,
easiest, if they just go to byobbcoach.com,
yeah,
that takes them to my main site, and they can find everything just using the menu to
yeah,
navigate.
yeah.
So I'm easy to find.
And I've definitely got to recommend getting the hard copy of the book, because I mean I need something in my hands almost, and just even having that hard copy there, even the feel, the sensation of turning the pages and reading them just means a lot more, and I'm a lot more invested in it than maybe looking on it on a Kindle or iPad or ebook. So I think that's definitely recommend people to get the hard copy with that.
The next Fortitude Training will be in hard copy. I know this for sure
Oh,
now.
will it?
Yeah,
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 perfect.
yeah. I keep hearing that, like literally. Plus, like the electronic version, a pirated copy got out, and now everyone buys
Mm,
it there. I have all sorts of. I'm pretty sure people aren't buying it from me,
mm,
because I'm not hardly selling any, and people go and they load it in their cart and they abandon the cart. So
right.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
just do hard copies from now on, so I can avoid
yeah.
the e-pirates.
Well, that's good.
So
So if
yeah,
anyone is finding it and they're finding it on a pirated website, get off it and have a
please,
look at,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
get off the website and have a look
right,
at going over to Amazon or something. And that's where I purchased mine from anyway. And
yeah,
literally came next day, Amazon Prime, and it's in my hands and I'm reading it. I mean, you've got an all-round year reference book there. It's perfect.
yeah.
Uh, so
The
if,
ebook is on my site only. It'll take you to
oh, is it?
Sendowl.
Right.
If you want to go to Sendowl, if you buy it anywhere else, and the Kindle, of course, through Amazon, you can
Yeah,
get.
yeah, yeah.
That's available. But they're like, if you just type in "Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach," you'll get, like, there are so many pirated versions. It's like you'll
Oh
get just
gosh,
tons of them. But if you go to my website and click to buy it there, then you'll get the one from me. So
perfect.
I would prefer that, of course, but
Yeah.
people can do, of course, what they need to do.
That's it. Well, you've spent enough time doing the book, Dr. Scott, and you've like definitely put the effort in doing it, even with your own experiences for how long you've been even training. It's worth purchasing the book just for that.
Thanks.
Um, so
Appreciate that.
if anybody wants to contact you on social medias or anything, what handles do you use? I mean,
Fortitude_training.
yeah,
I think you can just type Scott Stevenson. I come up, just a picture of
yeah,
my face. And then same thing on Facebook. Facebook, I think, is kind of fading a little bit. So
it is
I'm,
kind of,
as
yeah,
much as to my chagrin, I'm having to do more Instagram. I don't like the medium, because you've got about 2 seconds
yeah,
to catch people's attention. But
yeah.
um, yeah,
But
seems
but
to be
your
the thing for
Instagram
the future.
page is definitely worth looking at. I mean, when we talked about intuition, I think I remember seeing you doing tricep dips on a hamstring curl machine, was it, or a
Oh,
ab machine or something? Doing
right,
a
right.
muscle round on it or a cluster set, and even just looking at it for that, it's great for ideas. So it's perfect.
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
put those out there. There's so many. I found, actually, I should post this. I figured out how to do a calf raise on the glute machine in that gym
Right.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I'll try to post that one in the next week.
Yeah, definitely
So
get that on. We'll share it.
it's
We'll definitely share it for our guys to see
okay.
as well.
Plan, my
Uh,
man.
awesome. So we'll stop that there, Dr. Scott. Thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure. Appreciate it, bud.